Apparently, if you leave a computer for 7 years and don't delete old files, the terabyte of storage will fill up and things will stop working, including Photoshop.
These are the words I uttered after 2 weeks of working on a personal art project. And it took another week to finish after that point. So what you're seeing is what was supposed to be a 1-week experiment that turned into a 3-week endeavor. So let me tell you what's going on here and how I just about wrecked my computer again. Okay, maybe that's hyperbole, but either way it sucked. Last week I said I'd have a little announcement to go with this video, and that will come in a few minutes I suppose, but this personal project does lead into it. So this is an original character I hope to eventually play in the Wildmount setting in Dungeons & Dragons a la Critical Role. Seriously, love the show, it's kind of made my whole life. Anyway, so I've been kind of obsessed with this story I've come up with for her, and I was seriously thinking, maybe I should cosplay this original character on TikTok. I see other people doing it, and it looks like so much fun. The problem is, I have 10 projects spinning at any given time and serious time constraints. Combined with creative brain, this means I have way more stuff I want to do than I actually have time to give. Therefore, I had the bright idea, hey, I'm a visual artist, why don't I just draw this character and sharpen my arts and sketching skills rather than try building up cosplay skills from nothing? This seemed sensible enough. Actually, let me just explain this part of the art process real quick and then I'll move into drama and somewhere in the middle. So this is actually a new to me process for an art. This particular character I've made a face claim, or if you aren't in a fandom community, that means I have one person that I use as a sole facial reference. In this case, it is professional 90s model Dana Patrick. Probably best known for playing the love interest in the music video for Meatloaf's mega hit I Would Do Anything for Love, which, fun fact, Dana Patrick did not do the voice for, so the director just had her mime the female vocals. I think the voice lady was named Mrs. Loud or something. Anyway, because my face references professional model Dana Patrick as opposed to current-day professional photography business owner Dana Patrick, of whom I can find no current photos, I decided to also use some modeling shots of her for the pose as well. I spliced together a shot of her sitting at a table and another one of her with her head in a more open pose and made as plausible a skeleton sketch as I could, and then modified it even further. This character is a bard, and a dancer at that, so I wanted her to appear to have particularly long legs. Therein, I stretched the leg sketches rather than my references. Maybe I would regret that later, but whatever. Live, learn, and repeat, you know? Moving on to the outfit, I prematurely started inking on this one. I thought I could visualize what I wanted her to wear, but it just wasn't working out, so I took a runway shot of Dana Patrick and turned it into a paper doll kind of a thing to try out costume ideas. Also looked up some armor ideas since this is supposed to be a College of Valor bard, which effectively acts like a tank in combat situations. Tanks that distract opponents and heal allies. Eventually I landed on a leather corset and bracers and figured this is probably what I would introduce her as at level 3 or something low. Hey, I'll have her playing cards at a tavern table. Maybe that's how she meets the rest of the party. Oh, and at the end you'll see I gave her an 18-card hand, so she's playing French tarot. Look out for that at the end. I figured out a dress I liked and sketched that back out to draw in properly. And here's where I made another mistake. I got overly ambitious at this point and decided I was going to try for a lineless art style. All shadows and light forms, no lines, and I am just not to that point yet. I mean, I got a good 70% of the way there by the end, but really I should have done the line art inking first, so I could really nail down the forms just before the shading, and I had to redo a bunch of stuff later. Like an entire foot. Lesson learned, hammer out all the forms really well before rendering, cause yikes, I could have saved a few hours at least. Okay, now back to the drama. So I gave myself the goal of getting this full-body character portrait done within a week, which sounded reasonable enough, right? Just hyper-focus the free time in the early mornings and evening to get it done. But I suppose I was being hopeful. I was actually trying out entirely new to me techniques for digital art, so this was largely experimental. Even though the experiment took twice as long as I anticipated, it was still a quarter of the time as my realism portrait, so that was a win. On top of that experiment, I also tried doing screen recordings with the native IMAC commands, which turned out to be a major failure. What I didn't realize about this screen recording feature was the inherent shortcomings, namely the size of the files. Using Command-Shift-5, aka the QuickTime app, you don't get to specify quality levels or frame rate or file type, so it defaults to recording the highest quality settings in a large format. So while technically I could set it and forget it while doing my art thing, recording for a couple hours at a time would result in bonkers huge files, like 10 gigabytes for one session, kinda crazy. And they'd all be in .mov format, which is not at all as convenient as MP4 for my purposes. In order to use any of the footage you see here, I had to reformat all of the files to get them back to manageable kilobyte ranges, which also required speeding up the footage by 500% or more to get them to reasonable time signatures. So 30 minutes may be a long video for me, but really this is 3 weeks of work condensed down like so much tomato soup. Even in reformatting, some of the files were just too large to even open up, so that footage is straight up corrupted. And if you look closely at some of the footage, you can see it didn't even record correctly. It's super glitchy in a ton of places. So 1 out of 10, do not recommend the native screen recording software with IMAX without some major modifications. But that did catapult me into the next problem, which took the better part of the last week to resolve. In making these giant screen recordings, I filled up the storage on my computer fast. It had been a growing problem for a while since I'm super bad about cleaning out old stuff, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back. The straw that broke Camel's computer. So at the end of the second week, when I thought I would be finishing this character art, Photoshop quit working and my Time Machine backups wouldn't sync. Total nightmare. So I spent a few days going around deleting old stuff, running optimization software. I shoveled out a bit of money for both Clean My Mac and the Gemini apps to streamline a lot of it for me, which I wasn't happy about the unexpected expense, but I did save a ton of time by using them, which is the real resource here. Can't make more time. So with my terabyte of memory maxed out, I was able to open up over 100 gigabytes of memory, which allowed me to use my computer again. Still haven't done a right proper memory cleaning, but that's something I can actually schedule for in between projects whenever I feel like scheduling that kind of thing. Big messes really do come up in the middle of things, don't they? And now back to art talk. On the topic of rendering, I've been experimenting on a smaller scale version of the shading technique, using flat colors on a base layer and then having a multiply layer with a mid-tone neutral to shave over parts. Plus I'd set those as clipping masks to stay inside the very proverbial lines. Didn't work super well in areas that overlapped, like where the legs crossed. If I had done line art first, I could have had a much easier time lassoing those isolations. I also used the smudge brush to do some blending, but it was kinda fell flat in a lot of ways, so I'll have to find another way to get the blending effect I want next time. I've got a couple of ideas, but it did help out a lot when I decided to make the dress two tones, so it could easily slap on some gradient layer masks to get the effect I wanted. I wasn't super happy with how many layers I ended up with since my entirety of my painting education was in traditional media, namely gouache and oil, so learning to think in digitally overlapping layers is still a bit of a mind stretch in a lot of ways. Oh well, as long as I name the layers I don't get overly confused, though I still somehow end up with bits of errant strokes on random layers. Also gotta learn to work more cleanly. Maybe if I'd done the liner first. In trying to find my stylistic voice, I am using a semi-academic approach. A lot of art programs will imply some of this or require big old written papers, but here's a modified approach I've been working from. I have given myself a secret Pinterest board and have a pretty small number of pins in it. They are of a handful of artists that I am super inspired by and limited to only one example from each artist of my very, very favorite work of theirs. Well, there is this one artist in there I have 2 pins for, but they are pretty different styles and showcase different strengths while still being very her, but that's an exception for the rule. So I have this small board of very select, ultra interesting work I can draw inspiration from, but here's where the academic approach comes in. I take 3, maybe 4 of those works and write out a few paragraphs, or because I am not a font of words, as much as I can about all the specifics about what really catches my interest. Most of those artists are illustrators of some fashion, so I usually have a paragraph about what's going on in the scene, who the characters are, what I think they're like based on the evidence around them, the costuming, is there a color story going on, or are the colors just support for the forms, is there anything in the application or texture or rendering, the line work, lighting versus shading, tone and mood, if there's anything that strikes me as not quite right, and why, and what I would do to fix it. When I write out all that I can for each of those works, I can then look for common elements between them that have spoken to me as an artist. I can then also select individual traits from each work, like taking the storytelling from one, the color approach from a second, and the line work from a third, and making a practice piece using those elements. Being deliberate about your influences gives you a much higher chance of using your artistic tools effectively and figuring out what really works for you. And this is me trying that. Though I'm not going to say who I'm trying for what right here. In this case, it's more like exploring the program and getting used to drawing natively on a computer. This approach also makes it fairly straightforward to experiment, since you can mix and match so many aspects from your favorites to make entirely new and unique art from the same basic approach. Maybe give it a try sometime. For the highlights, it's a similar setup as the shading, except the layer is set to screen instead of multiply. I started with the same mid-tone neutral, but later realized it was really flat, so I redid most of the highlights with a tint of the same red from the dress, which brought out a much healthier looking skin tone. It also worked well in the dress and the leather. I'm a big fan of limited color palettes, as you can tell. Harkens back to my layer minimalism tendencies, except this is kind of a universal art technique. Maybe I should have used a red or purple for the shading instead of gray. Maybe try that again later, see what happens. A new tool I've also tried out, particularly for the line art, is the Hay Stylus for Macs. Hay spelled H-E-J. It's a tool that modifies how lines are made. Based on the particular functions and their settings within that tool, you can make drawing perspective really straightforward, draw straight or curved lines simply with a normal brush, or my personal favorite, use a string function to draw much smoother lines. And something about physics as well, I don't know. My 2-week trial ran out while my computer storage problem came up, so I didn't get to try everything out. I'm going to buy the full version a couple paychecks from now when I clear some other upcoming expenses. Yay adulting, I can budget! In the end, I'm not super happy with how that skirt is pooling on the floor, since I really wanted to portray a fairly full skirt made of a silk-like material, but I haven't really hit the mark in that vein. Having a costume skirt on hand for reference would have been super helpful, since this searching for a particular kind of reference was taking way too long. I also meant to add a line for the eyelids, but totally got distracted with the rest of the makeup. I suppose I can add it in a line later to make sure to do it in the future drawings somehow. In retrospect, the shading in the legs is a bit off as well, and I could nitpick this in a bunch of other ways, but it would be more helpful to just take note of those shortcomings and then move on to the applying that learning to the next project. And now, announcement time. One of the big reasons I started this project in the midst of doing another large realism commission is that I wanted to do a kind of trial run of an imaginative character because I have joined an art project called The Tourist's Guide to Wildmount. It is a fan-made project of artists who love Critical Role, going through the campaign settings of the show in the book Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, illustrating as many of the people, places, food, lifestyles, and things as possible. A visual love letter to the world of Matthew Mercer, as they call it. I was too busy to join the summer project of my favorite setting, the Kryn Dynasty, which was a real bummer, but I am joining the autumn project of the Dwendalian Empire, which is far more detailed than most of the rest of the settings thus far. I am super pumped about my assignment, which is the Griffin Riders of Rexentrum. I did sign up for only one art piece because I'm not entirely crazy, just maybe overly ambitious at times. I'm so hyped, I'm probably going to sign up for a winter assignment as well, and perhaps later go back and do some of the spring and summer items that ended up not getting illustrated. I suspect I may be trying to girl boss a little too close to the sun this season, however, since I am also trying to get weekly art videos out, but working on a large realism commission, plus working on the Griffin Riders illustration. Plus, there's a Halloween art contest type thing that my boss really wants me to enter since they know I make skeleton art prints. Oh, and I actually need to market my art prints. Plus, it's the time of year where every weekend is accounted for in the fall, so time feels particularly scarce. Of course, this is also the time where my hobbies are also screaming in my head for attention, particularly the fanfiction reading and the Halloween quilt I've been casually planning. And finally, I wanted there to be a semblance of a setting, so I did a sketchy, incomplete implication of a chair and table and filled the background with a simple gradient because a blank white just wasn't doing it for me. And there you have it, the first finish art of my character in a style exploration, and the announcement of joining the 2021 fan project, Tourist Guide to Wildmount. Thanks for watching, hit that like and subscribe button, and I hope you have a super duper day.